He wore the robe of justice, then killed his colleagues' Kaufman County murders. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. Kaufman County, Texas. A place where neighbors wave, lawmen serve proudly, and courtrooms echo with the pursuit of justice. Nestled just outside Dallas, this rural county seemed immune to the chaos often televised from bigger cities. But in 2013, Kaufman County would become the epicenter of one of the most shocking betrayals in modern American law enforcement history. It began not with a scream, but with silence. Early on a crisp January morning, Assistant District Attorney Mark Hasse stepped out of his car in downtown Kaufman, heading toward the county courthouse. He had a routine park, coffee in hand, briefcase by his side. That day, however, someone else was watching, and someone else had a different routine in mind. Two men in tactical gear approached him. In broad daylight, in front of witnesses, they opened fire. Multiple shots, quick succession. Hasse collapsed. His briefcase hit the pavement. The courthouse square echoed with chaos. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Just like that, one of Kaufman's most respected prosecutors, a man who stood for order and consequence, was executed mafia-style, just steps from where he'd sent criminals away. And the killer vanished. Law enforcement across Texas scrambled. Was this cartel violence? A gang hit? Retaliation from a drug conviction? FBI agents, Texas Rangers, and local deputies locked down the area. Every known felon, former convict, and disgruntled parolee came under review. But no one could have imagined that the person responsible wasn't a criminal with a vendetta. It was a man of the law himself. Eric Williams had once worn the very robe of justice. A former Kaufman County Justice of the Peace, Williams was articulate, educated, and seemingly harmless. He'd presided over minor disputes, issued warrants, and ruled from the bench with calm authority. But under the surface, Williams seethed. In 2012, he'd been prosecuted by Mark Hasse and District Attorney Mike McClelland for stealing computer monitors from the county. A petty crime, some argued, but a felony nonetheless. It cost Williams his judgeship, his law license, and his reputation. He swore revenge. Not loudly, not publicly, but in ways that would become chillingly clear. 2 months after Hasse's murder, the unthinkable happened again. On March 30th, 2013, Easter weekend, District Attorney Mike McClelland and his wife Cynthia were found dead in their home. They had been executed. Mike was shot multiple times, his body riddled with bullets. Cynthia, too, had been gunned down. There were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds. It was swift, clean, professional. The message was clear. No one was safe, not even the top prosecutor. Fear gripped Kaufman County. Courthouse security doubled. Judges wore bulletproof vests. Prosecutors changed routines. Some sent their families out of town. Who was targeting the justice system and why? In the days following the McClelland murders, a local police officer remembered something odd. Months earlier, a man had asked him about security patrols, specifically around the DA's home. The man? Eric Williams. The officer thought little of it then. But in the new light, it glowed like a flare. Authorities pulled surveillance footage, reviewed old reports, and followed up on every interaction Williams had with law enforcement. They found more than suspicion. They found preparation. In April 2013, police searched a storage unit rented by Williams. Inside, they discovered weapons, body armor, surveillance equipment, and a getaway vehicle matching descriptions from the crime scenes. The evidence was overwhelming. Williams was arrested. The man who once wore a judge's robe was now in handcuffs, facing the death penalty for killing his colleagues. The very people who had once shared courtrooms, calendars, and Christmas cards with him. But this was only the beginning. The trial would uncover a level of rage and revenge that would stun even seasoned investigators. And in the next chapter, we dive into the twisted motivations behind the man who turned justice into vengeance. By the time Eric Williams stood in front of a judge, not as a man of the bench, but as an accused murderer, the entire state of Texas had already formed its opinion. Headlines had declared him guilty. Community members, once his neighbors, now looked on in disbelief, and the families of the victims watched with hollowed eyes, bracing for what the justice system could or couldn't deliver. But trials aren't won in the court of public opinion. They unfold in silence, in strategy, in the sterile glow of fluorescent courtrooms where every piece of evidence is a thread in a much larger web. The trial venue was moved out of Kaufman County to Rockwall County due to the massive media attention and public fear. Security was intense. Armed marshals, bomb-sniffing dogs, metal detectors, and controlled entry points. Jurors' names were kept secret. Even their families were shielded. Everyone feared that the man who had allegedly planned and executed 2 courthouse assassinations might still have sympathizers, or even further plans. Lead prosecutor Bill Werski wasted no time. In his opening statement, he set the tone. This man executed 2 people in cold blood because his ego was bruised and his pride was wounded. He wanted revenge, and he planned it with the precision of a military operation. The prosecution called more than 80 witnesses, each contributing a brick to the fortress of evidence being built against Williams. Crime scene investigators detailed the forensic match between bullets found in the McClellan's home and the guns recovered from Williams' storage unit. Digital analysts explained how GPS and cell tower data placed Williams near the crime scenes. Colleagues and former friends testified about his anger, his obsession with the case that ruined his career, and the chilling comments he made in private. But the most damning piece? A detailed confession, recorded by his own wife, Kim Williams. Kim, often described as soft-spoken and emotionally fragile, had once stood by Eric's side. But that changed quickly after his arrest. Under pressure from law enforcement, and perhaps her own conscience, Kim agreed to cooperate. Her testimony was explosive. She described Eric's descent into hatred, how he referred to the McClellans as enemies, and how he obsessed over Hossie. She recounted the planning, from purchasing disguises to selecting weapons to practicing escape routes. She claimed she was present during the drive to the McClellans' home, though she never entered. Her confession included chilling lines like, "He said they took his life, so he was going to take theirs." Kim's plea bargain ensured a reduced sentence, but it sealed Eric's fate in the eyes of many. Eric Williams' defense team faced an uphill battle. They argued that Kim Williams was unreliable, emotionally unstable, and manipulative. They suggested that she had turned on Eric out of spite, jealousy, or mental instability. They also challenged the forensic evidence, pointing to potential contamination and chain of custody issues. They criticized the police for focusing too heavily on Williams from the outset, ignoring other possible suspects, including violent criminals the DA's office had prosecuted. But their arguments lacked teeth. The confession was too detailed, the surveillance footage too clear, the connections too tight. The jury, though quiet, seemed unconvinced by every rebuttal. The trial lasted nearly a month. Jurors heard hours of testimony, viewed hundreds of exhibits, and sat through graphic descriptions of the killings. They saw photos of the crime scenes that even seasoned officers found difficult to stomach. At closing arguments, the prosecution tied it all together. This man was not insane. He was not delusional. He was meticulous, bitter, and filled with rage, and he acted on it. The defense rested with a plea for mercy in interpretation. Deliberation took less than 2 days. On December 4, 2014, Eric Williams was found guilty of capital murder in the deaths of Cynthia and Mike McClelland. The jury did not waver. Their decision was unanimous. In the sentencing phase, prosecutors pursued the death penalty, arguing that the crime was premeditated, calculated, and executed against public officials, making it among the most egregious acts of betrayal possible. Williams showed little emotion. He didn't cry. He didn't protest. He just watched. In the aftermath of the trial, Kaufman County began to breathe again. Security levels relaxed. Prosecutors stopped wearing bulletproof vests. Citizens started walking freely downtown. But the scars remained emotional, political, and institutional. The case had redefined how small-town justice was perceived. It reminded everyone that threats don't always come from outside. Sometimes they come from within. But the story wasn't over yet. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. After Eric Williams was sentenced to death, he was transferred to the Polunsky Unit in Livingston, Texas, a maximum security facility that houses death row inmates in near-total isolation. For a man who once stood in courtrooms delivering verdicts, the irony was suffocating. His cell was a 6 by 10-foot concrete box. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Meals were slid through a narrow slot in the door. He was allowed 1 hour of recreation per day in a fenced cage. No phone, no internet, no freedom. But what Eric Williams did have was time, and he used it to write. Prison officials discovered that Williams had begun keeping journals. Pages upon pages of thoughts, arguments, and commentary, often written in meticulous legal language, as if he were still wearing his judicial robe. In many entries, he maintained his innocence. In others, he railed against the prosecutors, judges, and witnesses who had conspired to ruin him. One excerpt read, "They needed a villain and they made me one. Perfect narrative, judge turned killer. But truth is never that clean." His writing style was cold, precise, and strangely detached, like a man writing about a movie he once saw, not murders he was convicted of committing. He wrote about justice, about revenge, about legacy, and occasionally about the victims, but never in a way that suggested remorse. Though heavily restricted, Williams was permitted to send and receive monitored mail. And a small group of individuals, true crime enthusiasts, criminal psychology students, and even a few journalists began exchanging letters with him. In these letters, he presented himself as the misunderstood intellectual, wrongfully accused and politically sacrificed. He criticized the media, calling the coverage sensationalist garbage. But what disturbed readers the most wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't say. He never once wrote the names Mark Hasse, Mike McClelland, or Cynthia McClelland. It was as though they had ceased to exist. As time dragged on, Williams' tone shifted. He began to reference historic assassins and political revolutionaries, often in glorifying terms. In one entry, he wrote, "History doesn't always remember the facts. It remembers impact, and sometimes that's enough." Prison psychologists flagged the writings. While he displayed no overt signs of suicidal ideation or mental breakdown, there was a growing sense that Williams wasn't merely processing his incarceration. He was rewriting his own mythology. In his mind, he wasn't a convicted murderer. He was a symbol, a casualty of injustice. Legally, Eric Williams pursued every avenue available. His defense attorneys filed appeals based on alleged jury bias, improper evidence handling, and prosecutorial misconduct. But the evidence was too strong, and the appeals were repeatedly denied. Each rejection was met with another wave of letters, targeting courts, journalists, and even political figures. He claimed he was a political prisoner, a term that rang hollow given the brutal nature of his crimes. Even as his legal options dwindled, Williams kept writing, perhaps not to win, but simply to be heard. Amid Williams' writings, one voice stood in stark contrast: Debbie Carter, Cynthia McClelland's sister. She spoke publicly about the pain of watching her sister's murder become entertainment. In an emotional interview, she said, "He can write all the letters he wants. We don't need words from a cell. We need Cynthia back." Her advocacy led to legislation in Texas tightening protections for prosecutors and their families, laws unofficially dubbed the McClelland Measures. In death, Mike and Cynthia had made the justice system stronger. In late 2022, a journalist working on a documentary received a final letter from Williams. It read, "When you stare at the gavel long enough, you either accept its judgment or become it." The letter ended with a chilling quote from Friedrich Nietzsche: "Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster." The journalist never responded. Eric Williams remains on death row today, his execution date not yet set. But the damage he caused will never be forgotten. The betrayal shook the very core of a justice system that trusted him. From the outside, Kim Williams looked like a quiet, unassuming woman, soft-spoken, reserved, church-going, a former schoolteacher with a simple life in Kaufman County. Her marriage to Eric Williams was seen as just another small-town union, ordinary, perhaps even mundane. But behind closed doors, their relationship had become something much darker. This chapter pulls back the curtain on Kim Williams, the woman who once stood silently behind her husband and later stood in court as one of the prosecution's most damning witnesses. Kim's transformation didn't happen overnight. In fact, even after Eric's arrest, she initially refused to cooperate. But under pressure and possibly guilt, she agreed to talk. The story she told shocked everyone. She claimed that Eric had become increasingly obsessed with revenge after his disbarment and conviction. He believed he had been unfairly targeted, and he often talked about how the legal system destroyed his life. Kim said she was present for every major planning stage of the murders: the purchase of weapons and disguises, the surveillance of the victims' homes, the discussions about escape routes and alibis. She admitted to being in the car during both the Hossie shooting and the McClellan murders, though she claimed she stayed inside while Eric carried out the killings. It was a haunting admission. Not only had she watched her husband transform into a killer, she had ridden beside him. Court records and interviews reveal that the Williams marriage was far from healthy. Friends described Kim as isolated, dependent, and emotionally dominated by Eric. Some suggested a form of psychological control, where Eric's intellect and manipulation overshadowed Kim's will. Yet others argue that she wasn't just a passenger. She was a willing accomplice. In one of her police interviews, she recalled Eric saying, "If they take me down, I'm taking everyone with me." To which she responded, "Then let's get it over with." That quote alone changed the tone of the case. This wasn't just a man unraveling. It was a couple joined by rage. Despite their calculated planning, the Williamses made several key mistakes. Sloppy digital footprints. Kim's internet search history included chilling queries like, "What time do prosecutors leave the courthouse?" and "How long does gunshot residue last?" Inconsistent alibis. Their stories didn't match. Kim placed Eric in one location. Eric claimed to be elsewhere. Physical evidence, surveillance footage, and ballistics evidence traced back to guns and items stored in a unit rented under Eric's name. But perhaps the biggest mistake of all was underestimating Kim. When she turned on Eric, she didn't just confess. She brought detail, and prosecutors love detail. After the McClellan murders, law enforcement feared more attacks. Some prosecutors left the state. Others began carrying guns. There was even talk of domestic terrorism. The search for Eric intensified. Dozens of agencies coordinated surveillance, wiretaps, and digital tracking. When investigators found a storage unit registered under his name, they uncovered a massive weapons cache, maps, and even hit lists. Eric was arrested shortly after, but even in custody, he denied everything. Until Kim started talking. Many asked, why did Kim confess? What turned her from silent partner to state's witness? Some say she feared a life sentence herself. Others believe she cracked under the weight of guilt. But during her testimony, Kim offered a chillingly simple answer. "I wanted people to know what he did. I couldn't carry it anymore." Her plea deal secured a 40-year sentence. She would be eligible for parole in 2033, but whether the public will ever forgive her is another story. The story of Kim and Eric Williams isn't just about murder. It's about power, fear, and the slow decay of two people who once wore the robes of everyday life and traded them for bloodstains. In the years following the murders of Mark Hossie and Mike and Cynthia McClellan, Kaufman County has slowly tried to return to normal. But normal is a fragile thing. The courthouse still feels colder. The hallways still echo with caution. And the scars of betrayal, inflicted from within the justice system itself, remain etched into every policy and every mind. This chapter explores the long shadows of the Kaufman County murders, the people left behind, the institutions changed forever, and the lessons still being learned from one of the most chilling inside jobs in American legal history. Kaufman County was once a quiet community where neighbors trusted neighbors, and the DA's office felt like an extension of the public. That trust was shattered the day two prosecutors were executed in cold blood. Even after the convictions, security measures remained heightened. Courthouse visitors faced metal detectors, armed guards, and surveillance. The DA's office implemented new threat assessment protocols, background checks, and emergency procedures. Bulletproof glass replaced traditional windows in some county offices. But perhaps the biggest change was psychological. A county that once believed the law could protect them now lived with the knowledge that sometimes the law wears a mask. For the families of Mark Hasse and the McClellans, justice offered no real closure, only finality. Sherry McClelland, Mike's daughter, became an outspoken advocate for justice reform. She gave powerful speeches at legal conferences, warning about the dangers of blind trust in colleagues and the importance of mental health assessments for those in power. Mark Hasse's sister, Donna, kept a lower profile but continued to correspond with prosecutors across the country, offering support to those facing threats. These families didn't choose to be public figures, but the courtroom made them so. Eric Williams wasn't just any defendant. He was a former officer of the court. His crimes weren't just murders, they were an assault on the very institution of justice. In the wake of the case, Texas implemented reforms, increased security funding for county courthouses, expanded training on domestic terrorism and insider threats, mandated psychological screenings for judicial candidates in some jurisdictions. But the hardest truth was this: no policy could fully prevent a person from hiding darkness behind a robe of authority. Kim remains incarcerated. Her parole hearing in 2033 looms, but public opinion may prove a larger hurdle than the parole board. Many Texans, especially those in Kaufman County, believe she should spend the rest of her life behind bars. She occasionally writes letters to former friends and reporters. In one, she wrote, "I have nightmares almost every night. I see Cynthia's face. I hear the shots. I remember the silence afterward." Whether those words are regret or just memory is something only Kim knows. Eric remains on death row. He rarely speaks. He hasn't written public letters in years. His appeals have been exhausted. His execution date has not yet been scheduled. But when it is, few are expected to protest. A former judge, now a convicted murderer, awaiting death by the very system he once served. There's a silence in that irony. A silence louder than any gavel strike. True crime fans still debate the case. Documentaries have been made. Podcasts continue to dissect timelines, interviews, and theories. But for Kaufman County, the case isn't entertainment. It's a wound, and like any deep wound, healing comes slow. Some courthouse workers still glance over their shoulders when walking to their cars. New prosecutors whisper caution to interns. And every so often, a bouquet of flowers appears at the steps of the Kaufman County Courthouse. The story of Eric and Kim Williams isn't just about murder. It's about power misused, trust betrayed, and how even the most respected roles can hide the darkest intentions. But more importantly, it's about resilience. Because despite the horror, Kaufman County stood back up. It didn't collapse under fear. It adapted. It redefined justice, not as something automatic or assumed, but something earned and fiercely defended. And that is the final judgment. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.